Hello and welcome to CNBC-TV18. Our focus today is on European Union-India ties. Both the blocs are working on a free trade agreement with the ambition of concluding it by the end of 2025. Just for context, the two-way trade between India and the 27-member European Union is roughly $200 billion in goods and services. EU is India's largest trading partner. 6,000 European companies are present in India. The goods trade between Europe and India has increased 90% over the last decade. So clearly there is a lot of potential in terms of the economic partnership, but the European Union is also looking for closer strategic, political and defense alignment with India. To talk about all of this, we're now joined by Hervé Delphin, the European Union Ambassador to India. Ambassador Delphin, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Give us a sense of the progress of the trade deal right now.
Yeah, thank you, Parikshit, for having me today in your program. I think the figures you mentioned, I will speak for themselves about the intensity of our trade relations. But you could consider that for the size of our two economic geographies, actually we could do way more and better. And I think this is where the FTA stands. I mean, we have $200 billion of two-way trade. Maybe we could double that. And I think this is where the FTA stands. And indeed, there has been really an intensification of our relations and our negotiations on the FTA ever since the unprecedented visit of the College of European Commission here in February, where we had this meeting between the College and the Cabinet of the Union, led by Prime Minister Modi and President von der Leyen. What we've seen is intensification of the negotiation rounds, and in between intersessional sessions. And now we will have the 12th round of negotiation early July. So what I can say is there is definitely momentum. And we are, I would say, steady and resolute. And I think after the college visit, after the visit of EAM Jaishankar in Brussels last week, after the interaction between President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Modi in the context of the G7, clearly, FTA looms big and tall and on the top of our agenda. So I think both sides are definitely committed to get the deal done and by the end of the year. And I think that's what the leaders have instructed both negotiating teams to deliver, and not just by the end of the year, but also a meaningful FTA. So that is what we are looking at.
Right. Now, we have been getting reports that while we want to complete a full trade deal with the European Union by the end of the year, both sides may also have an early trade deal, an interim trade deal by July. Is there an ambition to do that? Are we close to that?
I think the July deadline seems to apply to another geography rather than to the EU. I think the message of our leaders, as I mentioned, was very clear: by the end of the year. So what matters most for us is not the fast and furious, and is a steady and progressive negotiation that really brings tangible results. I think most important is the substance of this trade deal. So we are not somehow bound by any artificial deadline by July or other. That doesn't really concerns both the EU and India in their relations. So I think we are comfortable with the pace, with the intensity, the focus of the negotiation as we have them, and I think both sides are really determined to have really something substantive. So let's have it this way, and if we have it earlier than by the year, fair enough, but we don't feel bound by having an early harvest, as you mentioned.
Right. So what I wanted to understand, sir, that there is no such plan on the table to have this deal done in two phases. Whenever a deal is done, it will only be a one deal and full deal?
If we think that we can achieve it, and there is no reason and no counter-indication that we cannot do it, we are going for the full Monty. So this is, and I think the current dynamics in momentum in the negotiation points toward that. Have and go for a full-fledged FTA, a meaningful one, and within the time frame set by our leaders. And so far, that's what we've been following. And I don't think there is any compelling reason for departing from that objective.
Right. Any plans to reach some sort of understanding on trade, on the non-tariff barriers by July?
I think what clearly, talking about the chapters, and I think that of the negotiation in concrete, there have been progress made on many issues, like on procurement and others. But what is now still to be closed are chapters concerns indeed tariffs, non-tariff barriers, rule of origin. So there are important blocks that really are at the center of the FTA, and these are to be, deals have to be made on that. So whether they are done at the next round in July or another round in August or September, I do not know. I would wish the earlier the better. But the important is really the quality of the substance and what is being discussed.
Right. 23 chapters that are there in the entire draft. Could you give us a sense of how many chapters have we been able to conclude so far?
I think when we say conclude, where there is an agreement, where there is a consensus, I think we are close to 10.
Speaking about some of the specific areas, automobiles. One of the reasons why previous trade deal with European Union, when the negotiations were going on, could not go off because of the automobile tariffs and lack of consensus around that. What is your view on negotiations on automobile tariffs this time around?
I think there is on both sides a clear understanding that we really need to make a sort of breakthrough on that one, and it's a key element of the FTA. So this is certainly one issue that would be in the limelight of conversations in the next round. So I can really see this as a key area where both sides would have to make and find, I would say, a positive and ambitious deal.
Right. What would be your ambition here, sir, considering that there's a huge European car industry and also auto components industry as well? What would be the ambition in terms of lowering tariffs? We've seen how India has lowered tariffs for the UK to 10%. But the legal scrubbing is yet to be done, and possibly it's going to be only for a certain category of vehicles with a quota fixed on an annual basis. Would you be agreeable to a similar deal, or would you want something more ambitious and lower tariffs?
I think as far as the tariffs, I will not certainly open the negotiating box here in this conversation, but I think there is a sort of simply a scale effect that the EU economy is way larger than the UK, and that scale element should be reflected in the final agreement when it comes to the size of the quota as you define it. So I think that is element, and of course the tariff is also a part of the discussion. So, but as to the specific, I think I would not preempt in any way the discussion that will take place in a few weeks.
Speaking about wines and spirits, there has been, of course, talk on the basis of the UK FTA that India will reduce tariffs to 75% for UK Scotch and wines, and it will further come down to about 40% over the next 10 years or so. What would the European Union want in terms of lowering barriers for Europe's wines and spirits?
I think this is clearly an offensive interest of the EU, that's no doubt, and I think the European wine and spirits industry is very keen to have the potential of developing and upscaling its trade with India. Do not forget that also many European companies in this sector is already present and investing in India and also re-exporting from India towards other markets. So I think you have to take the whole perspective. It's not just, net export from Europe to India, but it's what all it brings together, the possibility also of European companies to further invest in India and exporting from India to other markets. So yes, it is definitely important, and we would expect some significant breakthrough in that domain.
Right. Major non-tariff barriers which you've put on the table where you definitely want India to eliminate those rules, regulations, and non-tariff barriers for EU companies?
First, we are never contested the fact of India having technical barriers or in the sense of they want to ensure high standards. And I think every constituency would have a similar approach. What we are saying is that EU products usually are certified with a very high level of safety and security for consumers. So anything that can reduce the cost of processing in this QCO validation would be really be a net gain from everyone. Because European companies trying to access the Indian market often face QCOs. The problem is not the QCO itself, it's the process of obtaining those QCOs. So this is part of the conversation, that anything that can be done to simplify, accelerate, and stabilize the QCO's environment will be a net gain. I mean, we observe that in India there is a discussion also, a domestic discussion on the value and benefits of QCO. So we leave it for India to define, but this should not be an impediment for fast-tracking trade, because the effect is that for today's, and if you ask European companies, they invest in India, but QCOs holds back more investment. So there is a net loss here because of the processing of this, or sometimes the duration of that the process takes for obtaining these QCOs. This is companies could say, you know, I need to convince my HQ in Europe, but the process are so long, then they reduce simply the investment. And that is really, I would say, maybe a case where you have a lose-lose scenario. So let's try to aim at something more positive and more conducive for the European business.
Right. CBAMs and deforestation regulations, India has been seeking a carve-out from that. In fact, according to certain reports, Indian government is even mulling retaliating in case that CBAM tax, carbon tax, is imposed on Indian companies. This will only go into effect in January next year. Is there any possibility, any discussion for a carve-out from India, for India?
I think the conversation is more about, you know, first, we've been engaging, reaching out to the Indian stakeholders and the private sector and been listening. Based on the feedback that we receive from different constituencies and private sector, we have moved and gone through what we call a simplification package of CBAM, which just this week there's been an agreement between the Council and the Parliament on this CBAM simplification package. So what we want to do is to come back to the Indian partners and stakeholders to explain what it is. And indeed, the Federation of Industry in India, FICCI, has been a partner in that, in trying to bring the conversation, and we will have this interaction with the Indian private sector early July. And I think that will help also to pave a way forward. And last, I would like to point out that, you know, CBAM, or the equivalent of CBAM, has been taken out of the FTA with the UK. And we have always made the point that CBAM is not a trade instrument. It is an instrument which is part of our climate agenda action. So I think all these elements should point towards a position of the EU where we are confident that we can address the issues that India has with CBAM, but outside the FTA.
All right. On that note, we take a short break, but don't go anywhere. This conversation with European Union Ambassador to India, Hervé Delphin, continues on the other side, and we will be talking about the EU-India strategic dialogue, the Iran-Israel war, the Russia-Ukraine war, and Operation Sindoor as well. Welcome back. You're watching CNBC-TV18, and our focus today is on European Union-India relations. And joining us is Hervé Delphin, European Union Ambassador to India. Let me ask you about the big takeaways from the EU-India strategic dialogue. How important is this in terms of ties between the two blocs?
I think it was the first of its kind of a strategic dialogue at a ministerial level, so with the High Representative Kaja Kallas and Dr. Jaishankar. I think it really speaks a lot about the maturity and the trust that really infuses the EU-India relation at this point in time. If you consider that our two entities are really trying to project themselves as poles of stability in a world either in flames or in turbulences, it's important that we have this kind of conversation at the strategic level. So the agenda covered a large series of important topics, and it was important to understand each other's perspective, but also see the degree of convergence and the strong will to act together.
Right. I'd like to ask you about some of the takeaways, especially on the security and information sharing agreement. I believe this is something that both sides will start working towards. Could you give us a sense of what this will entail, Ambassador?
I mean, you have to see this from the perspective of both sides interested in deepening their relation and their cooperation in security and defense. And there is an element of, I would say, of political and legal process for making this cooperation more operational. And what I mean by more operational is in the area of cooperation in defense industry. So the security of information agreement is an element that we have with any partners who will allow to exchange classified information. So this is, if you want, a prerequisite. So this has been launched in last December, and it is a process that usually takes a course of 8 to 10 months, and this is what is being now developed, and we are confident that this security of information agreement will be in place by the end of the year.
I would also like to ask you about this impact of these Middle East tensions on the cooperation under India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Do you think, has that been derailed as a result of tensions?
I mean, clearly all the crises that are affecting the Middle East are a serious cause of concern. I mean, whether it's the Yemen and the Houthis, and whether it's in the war in Gaza or now in Iran, this is really impacting the world economy, energy, but also the trade flows. For Europe, you know, 30 to 40% of our import and exports go through that sea lane in the Indian Ocean. And that's the reason why, by the way, we have two of our security and defense naval operations, both in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. It's not for any coincidence. So it is really important for us that the trade and the growth will happen in that part of the world, and I mean in Asia. And Europe has always been connected to that region. We are one of the major FDI investors, one of the always in the top 3 as a trade partners in the region. Many countries of the regions, it's not just India negotiating an FTA with us, but you know, you've got Malaysia, you've got Philippines and Thailand and Australia, and we have had already some concluded. So for us, is having this the possibility of maintaining the trade routes is absolutely vital for our economy, but also for our security. So indeed, these wars are really impacting negatively for the EU, as much as I guess it impacts negatively for India. But in answer to your question, I think the determination to have the IMEC developed and is strong on both sides. We are talking about a generational project. So it's not because we have issues and problems to deal with now in the Middle East that it should derail us from what is a truly strategic project. And I think the conversations will be maintained, and there have been, IMEC was a talking point during the visit of Dr. Jaishankar in Brussels. President von der Leyen reconfirmed on that occasion the commitment and the interest of the EU to be fully part of that. And just to give you an example, we are looking at the green shipping corridors with low carbon fuels between Europe and India. So we are looking at from European ports to ports. So there will be discussion with the ports of Mumbai and Mundra for that. We are also involved in the development of submarine cables for high-speed data between Europe, Africa and India, the so-called Blue Raman project, where the EU is also putting money together with private investors. So, you know, there are wars that are really certainly an issue, but that doesn't mean that we are standing idle. We are moving forward.
Right. The Ukraine-Russia war, it has not ended. What's your big worry here? An expectation from India right now?
I mean, you know, the people now maybe sort of get sort of growing a certain fatigue. But I can tell you in Europe, there is no fatigue when it comes to the wars of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. It's existential for us. It really threatens our borders. And that's the reason why the EU has been, supporting Ukraine unwaveringly over the period. We are now by far the largest supporter of Ukraine, 135 billion euros in all different kind of assistance, including military. We've been helping the training of over 80,000 Ukrainian soldiers, so we are determined. So for Europe, there are different levels. Continuing the support to Ukraine, that is really key. Strengthening our own European defense, we discussed that, and the plans that we mentioned about increasing European defense expenditures only between 2021 and 2024, our defense expenditures have increased by 36%, which is massive. Today, the European total of European defense expenditures is over 326 billion euros. That is over $355 billion. So this is massive. So we will defend ourselves. And you have next week a summit at NATO, and whatever we do is a single concept of arms. So there is no duplication. Everything is coordinated. So we will continue. And the third is how we can degrade the war economy of Russia, to stop waging war, which is against Ukraine. There is a clear and blatant aggression. No one had asked that. It was a war of choice of Russia against a sovereign country. And this is where we have our sanctions regime, our SINC convention, of sanctions being an issue, and this is something that we are looking at. We just presented 18th package of sanctions against Russia. So if you think that years ago there was this sort of view that, you know, EU is in tatters, EU will not be able to put up its position strong and clear towards Russia, I think we have demonstrated that we are resilient, we stand our course, and we are still supporting a just, a fair peace. We've been welcoming the efforts of President Trump to get a deal, but, you know, Russia has consistently shown that it's not ready to engage in a deal, and therefore we can only hope that Russia will engage in earnest in a peace process. But short of that and failing that, we will continue to support Ukraine. Right. And for us, this has been said several times by India, that is no time for war, and that they stand ready to help and facilitate and pass messages. We really welcome that attitude and the openness of India to play a positive role in that situation.
Ambassador Delphin, thank you so much for speaking to us here on CNBC-TV18, giving us a very comprehensive view and detailed view on the India-EU partnership and why it's not just important for our two blocs, but a very consequential partnership for the 21st century. That brings us to the end of our special broadcast here on Global Lens. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.